Welcome to the show. After the so-called heartbeat abortion bills in places like Ohio and Alabama and Georgia, the debate about abortion is kind of kicked into a much higher gear, and pro-lifers are having conversations they never dreamed they would have, like, how many years should an abortionist get? What about the hard cases now that Roe v. Wade is in the sights of the pro-life movement, at least in some remote way? It's a different game now, and it's a different kind of debate. Joining us today is the foundress of Live Action. She did so when she was 15 years old in her parents' house, the living room of her family, and she's gone on to do amazing things with Live Action. Lila Rose was fighting abortion before fighting abortion was cool, and she's our guest on The Patrick Coffin Show. Coming up in about 2.5 seconds. As promised, Lila Rose began Live Action at age 15. The website's liveaction.org. Lila, it's so great to have you. Thanks for carving out some of your busy time to be with us.
Thanks for having me, Patrick.
And congratulations. Welcome to the Sacrament of Matrimony.
Thank you. I feel very welcomed, and we love it. It's awesome.
Awesome. It's like sobriety. Try again tomorrow as well. Awesome. Lila, let me start with these heartbeat bills. I don't think people saw this coming 5 years ago. When you were doing undercover, body cam capture, communicating with Live Action, didn't it seem like you were like pushing that stone up the hill only to have it fall down again with so many challenges and obstacles and defeats? Just your comment on those laws being passed into
Sure.
American law.
Well, the laws didn't come out of nowhere. These laws were actually the energy and the passion and the supermajority pro-life legislatures that made these laws possible in these states has been in the works for years. So I've seen in the last 10 years a big shift in the pro-life movement where there's more energy, there's more strategy, and there's more growth than before. And so, 5 years ago, if you had asked me, I actually would not have been surprised. I would have told you, Patrick, Roe v. Wade will be ended in my generation, and we're going to see a completely different landscape in 10, 15, 20 years than we see today. So this is all part of the plan, not necessarily my plan or one person's plan, but a real tapestry of pro-life efforts that are working in tandem to transform the country, both legally and culturally.
Mm-hmm. That brings up a question I've been pondering for many years. I don't know if I've ever brought this up to you before, but which comes first? Which is cause and which is effect? Does the culture have to come first and that produces lawmakers, or is the law itself a teacher and that in turn forms culture? Maybe it's impossible to, maybe it's an irreconcilable debate. I don't know.
Sure. I think it's the cycle of water, like on our earth. It all kind of goes back, goes up and comes down, goes up and comes down. So they influence one another. I don't think that culture always precedes law, strictly speaking, and then vice versa. It's not one or the other. I think that they go in tandem. I mean, look at slavery. We had a civil war over slavery. We had Abraham Lincoln with an Emancipation Proclamation, which is questionable constitutionally. Then after that, we had a constitutional amendment. Then we had 100 years of discrimination in our laws. And then we had the civil rights movement. So things can take time, and the law and the culture feed off one another, which is why this is so exciting what's happening in the pro-life movement right now, because there is a strong block of people in this country who are 100% pro-life. They don't want any abortion. They see it as for what it is, a violent act against a child, never for a woman. And they are now creating laws that reflect that conviction and that reality, which is what's happened in Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi and these other states. So these things work together always.
I think you're right, and I think the supporters of abortion, at least the really zealous ones that have access to microphones and TV cameras, they're just kind of losing it. I just saw a New York Times headline: "Pregnancy kills, abortion saves lives." What? That's like George Orwell meets Franz Kafka meets, I don't know, Monty Python.
Yeah, well, and then NPR, so publicly funded radio, is putting out a guide for how to talk about abortion, and you're not allowed to say pro-life, you're not allowed to talk about what happens during the abortion termination. They actually share the actual euphemisms, so the false words you're supposed to use if you're a journalist. So it's really clear. Look, the media, the mainstream media, is all pro-abortion.
Mm-hmm.
The public school system is all pro-abortion. They actually have Planned Parenthood in the classroom, government funded.
Yep.
The celebrities in Hollywood are all pro-abortion. The Democratic Party is 100% pro-abortion through all 9 months for any reason. It's fascinating and it's amazing that so many young people are pro-life, when the school systems, the universities, the media, the celebrities are also pro-abortion. It just goes to show that no matter how much they lie, no matter how much they fearmonger, no matter how much they try to make something so horrible look so good, they keep failing.
And sometimes they fail in embarrassing ways, in ways that in their failure they accidentally affirm their opposing arguments. I'm thinking about washed-up celebrity Alyssa Milano going on a sex strike. Like, Alyssa, you support chastity. That's great. How is that going to help your cause?
Well, it might help the cause. Yeah. That's abstinence, if you're not ready to have a baby, sounds like a plan. So it was funny to see that play out, because it was all these pro-life people saying, "Good job, Alyssa," and a bunch of her abortion friends saying, "This is against women's sexuality," all of this stuff, as if a woman's sexuality is benefited by having an abortion. I mean, that's totally ridiculous and insulting, quite frankly. But and also, The Atlantic just came out with an article. I don't know if you saw this, Patrick, just a few weeks ago. 2 social scientists, not pro-life, not conservative, not Christian, not Catholic, and they did the research. And this is years of social data. Women who are married, in committed relationships, marriages, they are the most happy sexually. And women who are going to religious services at least once a month, mass or church, are even happier. So we know what makes women happy and empowered on a sexual level. It's marriage. It's following the teachings of the church.
Yeah, so the church has been right all along on this and other issues. I've interviewed a really wonderful psychiatrist named Dr. Aaron Cariotti. It's called Hope When Hope Seems Lost. And he pointed out the research on Catholic women is astounding. So women who believe in the teachings of the church and they go to Mass each Sunday and sometimes through the week, they had this is a 1,000-woman sample over several years, no suicide attempts.
Wow. So
the institution that the I just call it the lamestream media. I mean, to call them liberal media is, it's a tautology. But they rail against institutions that have an actual real-world validated track record of producing happiness in people, women in particular.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I became Catholic in college was because I just did the research. I was learning about different religions, and I was raised in an evangelical home, but learning that there's 2,000 years of this Catholic Church institution that fulfills all these things that Christ promised and commanded, that has this line of apostolic succession, and that has helped build Western civilization as we know it, which has created the most prosperity for people, the most freedom for people, which has elevated the status of women more than any other civilization. I was like, wow, maybe this says something about what the church is teaching about human flourishing and how we can actually create successful, peaceful, happy societies.
And the Catholic Church considers a woman to be the most superior human person in history. the woman who gave the word flesh. Yeah. You were at UCLA and you started live action investigations around 18 while
Correct.
Still an evangelical, right?
Correct.
And your family was a sprawling evangelical Bible believing family too. Were you sort of the first person to dip your toe in the Tiber? Did that start at some dominoes?
So there had been a lot of dipping of toes in my family. My dad was actually reading Thomas Aquinas when we were homeschooled. So I was reading Thomas Aquinas for class, in and out of Latin. I was learning Latin. My mother's a Latin teacher, and I'm translating Thomas Aquinas. So we were all sort of Rome wannabes without making any commitment and still going to evangelical whatever. But it was me in college who was like, okay, I'm jumping in the Tiber. And I told my parents, like, look, one of the big reasons I'm becoming Catholic is because I had an opportunity to actually learn about what the church teaches through you. I mean, whether it was inadvertent or not, that's how I learned. I mean, reading Thomas Aquinas, reading the church fathers and doctors, Athanasius, Justin Martyr. And so I was like, what gives? Come on over. And my dad was like, okay, you're right. He he was sort of waffling because he was hoping for the magical moment when the Orthodox and the Roman Catholics would come together, and then he would become, Catholic. But I was like, if it's the Eucharist, it's the Eucharist. If it's a succession, it's a succession. If it's the authority, it's the authority. And he was in. So a bunch of my family became Catholic after me, and there's still dribs and drabs. It still is happening.
At least there are more lifeguards on the other side now to help other family members.
Yeah.
I don't think people understand who grew up Catholic the sense of how long that no man's land can last. Because you're convinced the church's authority comes from Christ. You see how all the doctrine lines up. It's like this giant puzzle that all clicks together. But then signing on the line which is dotted, to quote Glenn Ross, that's something different. That requires an act of the will, and you have to cooperate with grace. So I just have a lot of patience for people who kind of linger. I mean, it's a very mysterious thing. My great example here, I've mentioned this before, is Chesterton's Orthodoxy was written when he was an Anglican, and he stayed Anglican for over 12 years after that book was published. Like, Gilbert, you don't believe your own arguments? What's going on here? You have to cooperate with grace. Yeah,
and it's also, it's not sheer intellect that takes us that path. And faith is a gift. Faith is a gift from God, and it's a mysterious gift how it's given. I think it's always available for us, but how we receive it and the complexities of receiving it, the family connections and the sense of culture and loyalties and our history. I mean, all of these things come into play. That being said, I think it's important that we pray like there's no tomorrow for the salvation and the conversion of all souls tomorrow, because Christ says, ask and you will receive, knock on the door, it will be open to you, seek and you will find. So we've got to be saying we want everyone to come into one church, full communion, and to be eternally happy forever all together. So we pray for that, but at the same time we're patient because we know it's mysterious how this all happened.
I'm glad you brought up you mentioned Justin Martyr, Thomas Aquinas, all the great thinkers that were, first class intellects. On the other hand, there's no explicit biblical condemnation of abortion. People have to understand, same with monogamy. There's a biblical toleration for polygamy. Of course, we need the church to draw out the implicit truths of Scripture. But talk a little bit, if you could, Lila, about why the pro-life position does not have to appeal to divine revelation to be coherent, to be reasonable, and to be effective. You don't have to go into a religious sidebar when common ground with people who are not believers is sufficient to begin at least the conversation.
Yeah, well, first I would say it doesn't take a complex exegesis to say that the Bible prohibits abortion or that Christianity prohibits abortion. It's not a very complex connection of dots to say Jesus is not okay with abortion. That being said, I agree. This need not be a religious argument, and that's what Live Action does a lot of the time, is focus on the argument from a perspective of, do we all agree in the right to life? Do we all agree that human beings have human rights, humans have human rights? And is that absolute? Is that unconditional? And I think most people agree it is. Even the United Nations, a very secular, institution, agrees. They have a declaration on human rights, and they say that all members of the human species have the right to live. So the next question is the embryo a member of the human species?
Right. And
you do a pretty simple scientific test to determine that. You ask the question is, when does a unique individual human life begin? When does life begin? Not philosophically, but biologically. Yeah. And that's pretty clear. Any embryology, any biology, human biology textbook will tell you that. Any embryologist will tell you that. Human life begins at the fusion of a sperm and an egg at the moment of fertilization. And that's when you have a unique individual life that just needs time and nourishment to grow. And that cell behaves differently than any other cell. It behaves to protect itself, first of all, from other sperm entering the egg because it's already complete and just needs time and nourishment to grow. So that's pretty conclusive, and that's the entire basis for the pro-life argument. This is a human life. Human lives deserve human rights. And that first right is life. You can't have any other human rights without the right to live. So we're going to fight for that right to live. And if you're a mother or a father, yes, there's a responsibility to not kill your offspring. You get to make parenting decisions, but you don't get to commit child abuse or child death. And that's where abortion is not a parenting decision. Abortion is killing your child, and that should be prohibited.
I had the grace to interview Dr. Bernard Nathanson before he passed away, and it was just a great pinch me moment. He endorsed my book, which used to be called Sex Natural. Now it's The Contraception Deception. And I bring him up because at the time he said what I'm about to share, I'm sure you've heard the quote, he was not even a believer. He was still floating around in atheist land, but he was pro-life. And he talked about the fact that every right that one has is subject to dilution. There's freedom of speech, but you can't yell, fire in a theater. Your body has a certain autonomy, but you can't illegally put drugs in it. Likewise, the human body in the womb is not even the mother's body. So all of this is on scientific grounds. You don't have to appeal to Jesus or Bible or Pope or Council or to get that far. By the way, yeah, I agree the Bible teaches against abortion, but we live in a culture of loopholes, and people always want to say, thou shalt not commit abortion, which is to say the killing of the baby in the womb is not there, and therefore maybe Jesus would be fine with it. I mean, you're going to find a Protestant apologist for just about any proposition. That's all I meant.
I mean, that's true. That's true. The Didache, though, is pretty clear on this, and that's all the early Christians. This is like kind of their catechism. And it said very explicitly, don't cause a miscarriage. Like, do not have an abortion.
Yeah.
But no, it's right. And you can argue anything out of anything. That doesn't mean it's a good argument.
That's I can see that as a Facebook meme. You can argue anything out of anything. It's true. What do you think about the three fur we've seen? 1, Gosnell. 2, Unplanned. And the third one is still being fought, and that's Roe v. Wade by Nick Loeb. I think it's fantastic that high-level writers and film producers are in sufficient numbers to create 3 movies back-to-back. I didn't see that coming 2 years ago.
Yeah, I love it. We get a lot of contacts behind the scenes of people working on films or wanting to work on films. So when I heard about the projects, I was not surprised, because the reality is there's a lot of people. I mean, there's a democratization happening in Hollywood, right? I mean, look at you. You're your own show. You don't need, you've got your own platform. You don't need to go and, make nice with CNN or something. So
right.
The reality is it's the same with movies today. I mean, there's so much independent filmmaking, and that democratization of voices and content and talent is what I think has helped the pro-life movement explode in the last 10 years. And live action, that's our strategy. We create our own platform. We create our own media. And these other films being made, they're not waiting on some big production house to give them permission. They're just like, we're going to do it. We're going to do a Kickstarter. We're going to get independent funding and just make it happen. And look, it's changing hearts and minds.
Permission this.
No permission needed, which is why the tech censorship stuff is so concerning.
Yep.
Because they now are they're worse than the traditional media gatekeepers of 20, 30 years ago. When you had the big 3 and they silenced it, anybody who got their news, they got it from just these 10 sources. Yep. It's even more dangerous now because they're controlling algorithms. They can do the shadow banning. And we know that Jack over at Twitter is pro-abortion. We know that Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, she donated $1 million very publicly to Planned Parenthood. So the fact that these tech companies control so much and they're so pro-abortion is really problematic.
Yeah, I'm already under someone's algorithm care. I use a little tongue in cheek there.
You're very euphemistic.
Yeah, our good friends at YouTube have decreed my interview with Walter Hoy, one of my heroes in life, totally shadow banned. And they send you these weird emails. I know you face this. Your video has been deemed to be not suitable for all advertisers. Sometimes they'll drag in family concerns, which is hilarious. I run a family show. No potty words, no porn, no violence. It's just the ideas they don't want out. It's the positions they do not want out. I personally, Lila, think this is part of a conscious, I'm not being conspiracy theorist I don't think, but I think this is a collective clearing of the decks for the 2020 election. I think they don't want hearts and minds moved in one way. And you can fight them again and again, which is what you have to do until someone creates another internet other than the one that Al Gore invented. But you've been shadow banned and kicked off routinely, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just last week, I did a show with Candace Owens where we talked about sexuality and chastity. I mean, we talked about chastity, and PragerU, all the other videos she did, they were able to advertise on YouTube, Roseanne Barr kind of being crass. They were able to advertise that. But our video where I'm talking about, chastity basically and effectively theology of the body, was they said it wasn't appropriate for advertising. So I think that you're right. There is a serious work being done by these platforms to weed out messages that go against sexual libertinism, that go against abortion, that go against, I think they're really upset with the president, but I think more than the president, they're upset with ideologies that violate their leftism. And that is really, really concerning. So what we do, live action's been banned from advertising on Twitter, for example. We run into problems with Facebook all the time. We always push back. We always publicize when it happens, if we can prove that it's actual suppression. But I think we've got a bigger issue where the conservatives and people who oppose leftism need to think through a bigger solution to that.
Have you been successful in your pushback and demanding, say, what they call manual review?
We've been successful on Facebook because I think Facebook is ideologically driven like Twitter, but they have more to lose. They're bigger, and a lot more of their platform is conservatives and mixed audiences. Twitter is more liberal, like more users are liberal, period. So we have been more successful on Facebook. We have not been successful with Twitter. Twitter has banned Live Action from doing any promotions, period. So that's just, we're still growing. We're still able to tweet. We're not banned as a actual feed, but there it is.
Yep, Facebook killed off half my followers a few months ago, just gone. So a lot of my tweets are not retweetable. So on and on it goes.
What was their reason for shutting down half your followers?
What's that?
What was their reason, Facebook, for shutting off followers?
Twitter will not even verify me. I've tried 4 times to get verified. So my Twitter handle is @Patrick_Coffin, bracket, blue check mark sits here. That's my Twitter handle.
You gave it to yourself. You're good.
Yeah. I just permission this. Yeah. I don't need your stinking blue check mark.
Just write an article for the Daily Beast and you will be verified.
Exactly. BuzzFeed, Daily Beast. I can put that in my bio. I have an idea for...
Be an intern for them and you will get verified.
Exactly. I can wear a body cam too. Let me see. Oh, I have an idea. If you ever interview Candace Owens again and you're talking about chastity, just say, in this episode, we're going to talk about chastity, and put chastity Bono, just as a photo. See, then you won't get censored.
Is that one of Bono's daughters?
Yeah, that's the trans one.
Oh, okay.
See, the joke doesn't work if you...
Sorry.
It's okay. You have a life.
I missed that one.
Tell me about the thing that made you famous or infamous, the thing that kind of really took a live action into second gear was the infiltration at Planned Parenthood clinics, where a young actress would wear a body cam and capture laws being violated and staffers misleading and so on. How did that, what was it like to train for that? And how nervous were you the first couple times out?
Sure. So it's something Live Action's still involved in. It's investigative watchdog reporting on the abortion industry, because as we were just talking about, the media is totally biased. The New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, whatever, they're not doing reporting on abortion facilities. This is unregulated, brutal industry, killing almost 1 million children every single year in our country legally. So our investigative reporting is meant to probe and test and expose all of these other abuses happening in these facilities, law breaking, the cover-up of child sexual abuse, all these things. So when I first started going undercover, I was very amateur as a journalist. I was just a student at the time, a college student, and I'd done a lot of research on how sexual abuse cover-up happens at abortion clinics, because they're like places where predators take their victims to get abortions to cover up their crime. And I wanted to see how they treated me as a potential sex abuse victim, because they're required by law to report it immediately. So I was nervous the first time doing undercover work, but it helped with the persona that I was putting on, which was an abuse victim, and they are nervous. and they're afraid, and they're often coerced, and they're in these situations with their boyfriend who's 10, 15, 20 years older than them, sometimes a family member. It's incest, and they're just sent off with $500 to the Planned Parenthood to get the abortion. So what I saw immediately when I started doing that work was they do cover up sexual abuse. They told me to lie about my age. I presented as a 15-year-old. They told me to say that I was older so that I could get a secret abortion, and they wouldn't report anything about my older boyfriend. And in the years since that, Patrick, we've done a ton of other investigations. We've been doing this for over 10 years now, different kind of scenarios, sex trafficking, Planned Parenthood literally agreeing to help self-professed sex traffickers, them free discounted contraception, discounted abortions for their sex ring of teenage 14-year-old girls. We've documented the late-term abortion industry, how Planned Parenthood actually and other abortion facilities commit abortions past the limit, and how they talk about the barbaric ways they treat these babies, and when the babies are born alive, how they take their lives. I mean, just the most horrific things. Which, again, people just don't know. And this is a corporation that's tax funded. They're getting over $500 million a year from taxpayers.
One of the things that causes me to marvel against Trump hatred is that President Trump, while he's said some things and made some moves that seem very pro-life, he will ally himself with the pro-life movement, but he believes in this big loophole. He didn't have great things to say about the Alabama and Georgia laws, and they're still funded. Do you find that the mission of Live Action is to not get too political? Because in the end, if you put your trust in princes and horses, it's not going to work out. In other words, is it frustrating at the glacial speed at which things happen?
Yes. And Live Action's focus is culture first. It's always been hearts and minds. When I started it at 15, it was changing the hearts and minds of Christians and other young people in my community of San Jose in schools and churches. And today, it's not much different. Changing the minds of hearts and minds of young people using creative media, investigative reporting, events, national activism. But we care about politics. We do care. We do not trust, that the GOP is going to be our savior. They haven't. And, occasionally there's a Democrat that comes along, extremely rarely, who's pro-life. So we really focus on results. And there have been some pro-life results from this administration, which we have every time said thank you and cheered them on. But there have been disappointments, too. We are still funding Planned Parenthood at the highest levels through Medicaid money reimbursements. And like you just said, the president did come out and tweet recently that he's pro-life, but I have 3 exceptions. That's not pro-life then. Like, if it's okay to kill the baby sometimes, why isn't it okay to kill the baby other times? Either it's okay to kill or it's not okay to kill. You can't get to pick which babies are worthy of protection and love and which aren't. So that has been disappointing. We kind of knew that going in. We did not come out blazing for Trump or anything.
No, I thought your reply to him was really great. You thanked him, but there was it was like you had a butt proviso of your own to counter his butt. The hard cases are the ones that pro-abortion advocates jump to immediately, even though we're talking less than 1% of all abortions happen because of rape and incest. And not just because rape is very hard to prove in court. It's a notoriously difficult charge to get a conviction on. And it's also rare that pregnancy would result from a trauma like that. And yet that thin edge of the wedge is the thing they jump to immediately, so that we'll be distracted from the 99% of abortions that are done for other reasons.
Right. I mean, it's terribly insincere and disingenuous and just flat out false when abortion advocates use these horrific, traumatic cases to justify the almost 1 million elective abortions that happen every year, almost completely out of convenience or because of the child was unwanted and we weren't ready, or all these different smorgasbord of reasons, which we care about. I mean, that's why we're working in the pro-life movement to help women and help girls. And there's thousands of resource centers, pregnancy resource centers to help young mothers. And that work matters. But I agree with you. I think that it's been really awful to see these stories of trauma trotted out as a justification for these violent acts against children and harm to women. And what we always say at Live Action is, look, rape is horrific, incest is horrific. The abuser should be held to the fullest account for his crimes. I mean, there should probably be harsher penalties for rape. I mean, that's been one of the complaints about it. The woman deserves support and care of her community. We need to rally around those survivors of trauma and support them and care for them. But abortion is not going to unrape a woman or a girl. It's not going to undo the trauma that she endured. It's going to add more trauma on top of that first trauma, and it takes out the penalty for that crime on an innocent third party. That child did not get to decide how she or he came into the world. She should not be held responsible for the sins of her father. We don't even give rapists the death penalty in our country.
That's
it's prohibited by federal law. But why would we give that penalty to the child?
There's a study by the Elliott Institute that looked at 192 women who had pregnancies through rape, and 80% of them who had abortions regretted it. They thought, in retrospect, even at the time, just after, this is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And the number of women that regretted giving birth, whether they cared for the child themselves or give the child for adoption, that number of regrets is zero. So there's her name is Michelle Knight. She was kidnapped by a guy called Ariel Castro. I'm sure you know the story. For years and years and years, he got her pregnant 4 times and beat her until the baby died, kicked her and so on. Horrible story. And it was her desire to carry the child and others like her in that situation that gave her hope, that prevented suicide, that, she figured, this is my baby, and not his.
Yeah. And look, if you actually take the time to talk to survivors of rape and incest, which Live Action, that's part of our job and we do that, you hear the most incredible stories. You hear regret after abortions. And then you hear women who chose to keep that baby. They were not pressured by abortion activist groups. They were protected from that onslaught of groups saying you should have an abortion because you were raped. Instead, they actually were able to go with what was in their heart. And that child brought incredible healing. It brought something beautiful out of the darkness. Those are the stories that the New York Times will never tell. The Washington Post is never going to report. Instead, they're going to report this 11-year-old victim of assault and give her the abortion, give it to her. How do you know that that's going to help her? Why are you assuming that another act of violence against her body, as well as the second body, is going to help? I mean, it is part of your agenda, your pro-abortion agenda, is why you're pushing this.
Yeah, I brought the Michelle Knight story because when it finally came to trial, when it all came out and she was liberated, he was charged with 4 degrees of murder, 4 different counts, which raises other questions. Well, is the killing wrong because of the identity of the killer or the identity of the victim?
Right.
And the other side doesn't have an answer to that. Are we really going to extend the right to life only to people who are quote unquote wanted by third parties, whether abortion doctors or the fathers who are involved? We never talk about the fathers, by the way.
Right.
It's always the mothers.
Well, and in that story with Ariel Castro, I mean, he had 2 other women that he kept captive in his home, right? And my understanding is one of the other women, I'm blanking on her name, but she actually was allowed to give birth and have a baby. He didn't force a miscarriage. And it was that child that helped save the 3 women ultimately.
Yeah, you've got the correct version of it. Yeah, I forget her name as well. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just incredible that it was the child that he did allow to come to life, to be born, I should say, that actually ended up helping lead to their freedom. So it's just this incredible combination of the power of a child always to bring beauty into the world in the face of darkness and struggle and fear. And that's the message of the pro-life movement, is that a child is always good news. No matter how hard the situation, a child is always good news. And as adults, we have to respect and trust that. And we will be happier in the end. We will be better off in the end.
History, in a way, is the story of God bringing greater good out of apparently irredeemable evils. It happens in every generation. Did you ever want to be an actress?
I did. That was one of my many aspirations when I was a little girl, a writer, an actress, singer, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I got to do it. I did it doing undercover stuff, and I did it in Unplanned. I had my one big line.
I was going to say, there was a reporter who bears an incredible likeness to Lila Rose in Unplanned.
Yes. So I've had my opportunities.
Well, I think you're right about the entertainment industry per se. The default position is that, of course, you support a woman's right to choose, and performers, particularly who go against the grain, are rather abruptly shunted, quarantined, shamed, sidelined. You think of the wonderful Patricia Heaton. I'm drawing a blank on his name. It'll come to me. Robert Davi. Great character actor. He was the opera singing bad guy in The Goodies. A fantastic actor. And I wonder what's going to happen to folks like John Voight. I mean, who stars as one of the justices in the upcoming Roe v. Wade. I think it's some of these people, they've already had their moment in the sun. They really couldn't care less. But that number is very small. I know my friend Jim Caviezel, his career's number 2. He's never going to back down on that. And that's rare, because I'm sure there are stars who are, if you take them under cover of night and ask them a question, I hate abortion. But
right.
if they put their head above the trench, it's goners.
Well, here's the thing. Hollywood is rapidly changing. It's sort of contracting, not expanding, because there is so many new talent on the block, so many independent film companies. There's YouTube. Young people don't watch TV anymore. They watch YouTube.
Yep.
So the YouTube stars are the new celebrities. They're the new Hollywood actors and actors.
Yep.
So that's really great, because there's more diversity, there's more democracy, there's more viewpoints. So live action, we don't even think about actors anymore. We think about YouTubers. We're thinking about who are the influencers online, on Instagram and YouTube, who are pro-life, that we can get to speak out on this issue. And forget Brie Larson, forget these other, I mean, not to say that they don't matter and their voice doesn't have some influence, because it does. But the people the top influencers for young people, especially teenagers today, are not Hollywood celebrities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's totally true. Folks over 40 have no idea the YouTube space as a really this. I mean, we spend the rest of the show talking about YouTube stars and their influence. I think it's
this guy named Patrick Hoffman on YouTube.
Yeah, you should measure your success by how many people are trying to block your message. I think your one success in life is partly determined by the kinds of enemies that you gain. Kelsey Grammer's the name I could remember. Who's worked with Abort 73. Seems like the tide's turning, Lila, with more and more vivid fetology images of the unborn, with more science-based arguments and approaches. It's a paradox, too, because you look at the number of people leaving Christian faith, becoming nuns, NONES, the hardcore secularization you see on campuses. With that comes a compensatory rise in focusing on science. And this is where groups like Live Action come in as a strength, because you have information, I should have mentioned earlier, liveaction.org, that's evidence and data-based. It's not the Bible says, it's science says. Tell us a little bit more about the kind of educational resources that you can find there.
Sure. So Live Action, we have over 3 million people following us online, and we create content that is, like you're saying, it's very educational. You don't have to be faith-based or from any particular background for it to impact you, and it's both emotional and more intellectual, connecting dots. Mm-hmm. And some of our most recent series, we had an abortion procedure series, which is still very effective and successful, which is actual medical animations of the most prevalent abortion procedures. So they're not gory, but you can see the size of see how these procedures are done. They're narrated by a former abortionist, so they're very credible. They were peer-reviewed by OBGYNs and other former abortionists. And then we have another series out that is pro-life replies to abortion arguments. So breaking down, when does life begin? And we have an embryologist explaining it. Sharing, my body, my choice, why that's not really a good argument, and this is why. And we found that these, the video we just released last week, already 4 million views, because people really find it useful and it's impactful for them. Mm-hmm. And then when we do surveys on Facebook, we found that of the people that we survey who have seen our content, 90% are saying that this strengthened their pro-life views. over 30% said it changed them from pro-choice to pro-life.
Yeah.
So we get to see and hear feedback of actual people changing their minds, and that's when we know we're succeeding.
People are open to a claim that's credible and effective, persuasive, but also is true. I think about because a number of influencers, YouTubers in particular, there's an Asian girl whose name has escaped me, walked into Gosnell, totally pro-choice. This is waiting for a stupid propaganda film, and was blown away and came out, committed pro-lifer. I sat next to a girl at the adjoining table at a Colf fundraiser, Colf, the great Dr. George Delgado. And it was one of the first ones they held. And the speaker was Dr. Anthony Levantino, former abortionist. And in the middle of dinner, there's like 600 people enjoying their steak or whatever. He holds up this instrument of death. And I thought, oh, this is going to be a major fail. I mean, the people are trying to eat. And he explained that he said, this was never used in an abortion. Don't worry. I would never bring something that was actually used. And he calmly, dispassionately, no emotion whatsoever, just the facts, ma'am. And this lady at the next table started weeping. And I found out later from the person she was with, she went in there very resistant. I don't know if she had an abortion in her own past. But that was it. She's no exception, 100% pro-life now. So awesome. The truth has to get out of its cage.
Yeah, we hear that all the time. And it was actually Dr. Levantino who narrated our abortion procedure videos. And they have over 100 million views online. So it's crazy to see people who just learn it for the first time and they're like, shoot, I didn't realize this is what abortion was.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'm pro-life now, because that is horrific.
Lila, people don't know what an abortion is. It's just a rhetorical thing, woman's right to choose my body, blah, blah, blah. When you see the humanity of the child, even early on, I mean, look at the way we determine death. Oh, no heartbeat, you're dead. No brainwaves, you're dead. Well, why don't you just invert that? Isn't the presence of a heartbeat showing a body that's not the mother's?
Right.
So you mentioned the live action videos, 4 million views?
So the one just from last week is at 4 million. Yeah, the first of our pro-life after a week. Yeah,
that's disgusting. I mean, that's awesome. That is so great. 4 million views.
People, we've been working at this for a long time because we know pro-life people are out there. Mm-hmm. We know people would be pro-life if they could connect to a message and a messenger that they can learn from and they can feel comfortable with. So that's our job at Live Action, build the biggest army possible online and in communities of pro-life champions who are sharing the message, who are influencers, and change the culture.
Right,
change the culture. But I will say that is step one, and Live Action's on it. We're working with other groups to do it. The bigger picture, and for any listeners right now, the bigger picture is transformation of a soul, transformation of a life, because you can be anti-abortion and still find yourself, having sex or whatever, and outside of marriage and living a lifestyle that's not healthy, that's not good, getting pregnant unexpectedly and still feel the temptation to abort, even though you have pro-life sentiment. Yeah. So that's why, the larger cultural context here that's really important for us to remember is we need to spread the message of what are we made for? What is our identity as humans? What is sex for? Mm-hmm. What is life for? Those are the big enchilada questions that the churches need to answer. The church has answers for, but individually we need to be thinking about for our friends and family and the larger culture.
Who are we and whose are we? Right?
Love that. Yeah.
Do you think? I want to get to your podcast in just a second because I'm excited to hear more about that. Do you think with the way pro-life people are treated at rallies and protests, often with little outbreaks of violence, not a lot, but it happens every state frequently, and that's with Roe v. Wade on their side. If more and more states, and if Roe v. Wade ever gets overturned, it'll all go back to local communities and state voters and so on. Do you foresee increased spikes in violence against pro-lifers? Because people are not ready for the sight of an abortionist getting carted off on the 6 o'clock news to jail. Mm-hmm. Are you concerned about something like, people say, civil war? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think there will be civil war, thanks be to God, because we're a different culture now. We are very violent, but in a different way than historically. we're very comfortable now. We're very complacent, I think, as a culture. So that's, in a sense, that's good in the way that if violence is committed, it's committed behind the closed door of an abortion facility. I mean, that's horrific. Or it's committed in the suicide rate, right?
Yeah.
Those are our violences. There's literally self-destruction are our violences. But I do agree with you. I think there will be more small violent outbreaks against pro-lifers and against the pro-life community. We've already seen some of them. I mean, one of our staff was just at a rally, and she was saying, she was cursed out in the most vile manner by a woman who was post-abortive. I mean, really sad.
Yeah.
So that's a reality. But look, I would say we keep operating in love. We keep marching forward. That is a necessary step, I think, because the wounds run so deep. There are so many people in this country who have had abortions and have been participated in abortions that have not reckoned with that trauma, that have not reckoned with that loss and that violence. They have always thought it was good. It was part of what I had to do. I'm going to move on. And now they have to reckon with it. And that reckoning is essential to setting people free and to healing, because you can't just pretend like it didn't happen. But it creates a lot of rage and anger and pain in the process, especially if they're resisting the truth about what they actually did. So I'm not surprised if it happens and will continue to happen, but I don't think it's inherently a bad thing. I think it's part of a healing process.
Yeah, and if you can't fix it, you can feature it. That's the great thing about the footage that you've captured. You're just showing what was said and what was done. I want to talk about your new podcast, because I have this homespun little image of the culture. If you think of the culture as a factory, and one of our products at the end of the assembly line is abortion, the way to fix it is not to go into the last minute and say, hey, don't cover up, don't ship that thing, just put it off to the side. If you start at the beginning, before the assembly line even starts, with raw materials, you focus on things like chastity. I don't mean Cher's daughter. See, I looped back there. Chastity, the virtue, and sexual sanity, and courting and marriage, as opposed to hookup culture and just dating for dating's sake. That, I mean, talk about an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. Do you have a title yet? And when's the big launch?
So the title is The Lila Rose Show.
Wow, I like it. It's bold.
And it did launch already, so I'll send you the first episode.
It's up and out already?
Yeah,
I thought this was still in the wings. Okay.
On Tuesday. And the first episode was a teaser. The second, which is already out, is on dating. And so this is my contribution to what you described. I think that was a fabulous analogy or metaphor, Patrick, but abortion is a sign of a lot of other things that went wrong.
Yeah.
And we got to still fight there. Like, Live Action's there, we're fighting, we're focused. But this podcast is a project to talk about everything else, identity, because it's not just dating and sex, it's identity. It's, what is my life for? What's the point of it all? Do I experience love? Do I feel loved and secure? Most people don't. They're raised in broken families. They have no faith. There's this constant existential crisis beneath the layers of their life. And that makes for a lot of disasters in decision making and in a lot of other parts of their life. So that's my point of the podcast, is to just be a small contribution to tackling some of these questions about relationships and identity. And yeah, it will get political and cultural. It will definitely not talk about that stuff, but it's meant to hopefully shed some light and bring on some experts and thoughtful people to talk about how do we live the best lives we can. And
you talk with Candace Owens about chastity as well.
That was her podcast. Yep.
Yeah. I've watched the first 5 minutes, and I have to get back to it because I'm oversubscribed in life. You went on the Dave Rubin show. So you are willing to put yourself sitting on a chair talking to someone who's diametrically opposed. Will you have people from the pro-abortion viewpoint on your show? Is that part of the plan, do you think?
Yeah, so the podcast is not supposed to be a space for debates on abortion per se. Live Action will we may be doing some hosted debates with abortionists. So that's something that Live Action will be doing. The podcast will interview, though, people that have expertise on things like relationships and our health and work and things like that. But I do think, personally, I love any opportunity to talk to someone who disagrees. My media team and the groups we work with know I'll take any interview of anybody who disagrees with me if they're willing to do it. But the reality is, Patrick, it's really rare. It's really rare to get somebody on the abortion side to agree to talk to you, whether it's on a network or on a podcast or anywhere. Dave Rubin is an anomaly. He's a wonderful one. He is willing to engage different perspectives. I have never been invited on MSNBC. I think I was invited once and they canceled. CNN, very rare. I tweet with some of their talent sometimes, but they won't have me on. So it's really tough to break through the walls because they only will feature a pro-life voice if they could make them look stupid or unattractive or just like not really in touch with the larger mainstream world. So I think that's part of the challenge right now is breaking past the boundaries and the barriers. But I think the best way to do it is just be your own content creator. I mean, it's just create your own content, make it as universal as possible, and then market the heck out of it.
Exactly right. If you're the head of your own river, you can send that river down anywhere you want. And now with the invention of the modem, we don't have to wait for Walter Cronkite. You and I are Walter Cronkite, or what's the feminine form of Walter? I don't know. Waltera? I don't know.
But for example, Dave Rubin reached out to Alyssa Milano's team, and he said, she has a podcast. He's like, will you sit down with Lila Rose and we'll have a three-way, civil, we'll have a conversation. And no, she's happy talking on her turf. Like she's happy talking. And then I would go on Alyssa's podcast, obviously. But the point is they don't want to engage with people who disagree with them. And Planned Parenthood even has a policy of non-engagement. It's actually a policy for all their representatives, for all their staff. They're not allowed to talk to pro-life people.
I just did a Coffin report on the apology that Representative Brian Sims gave. He used the word it was absolutely wrong, or I absolutely apologize for, drumroll, violating that policy, making his master, Planned Parenthood, look bad. He did apologize. He gave a kind of a verbal, to me it was like a Clintonian, sorry, not sorry. But his real heavy guns of regret was because he engaged pro-lifers. But by browbeating and shaming and screaming, it's just crazy.
There was no apology from this guy who tried to dox teenagers. He was a state representative outside of a Planned Parenthood facility. There were 3 teen girls praying with their mom. He put his camera on them, told his followers he'd give them a bounty of $100 if they could find their names and addresses. This is bullying and this is doxing and lead to violent acts against them. There was no apology for that. So I consider his apology completely worthless because he did not actually apologize for what he did wrong.
Mm-hmm. So health, dating, chastity, marriage, lifestyle.
Identity.
Who's your ideal listener? Who's your avatar listener? Someone who's going to get the most out of it.
I think it's most naturally going to be young women. I welcome the men. I think it will be useful for men, but it's going to be mostly young women. That's mostly who already follow me online or are connected directly with me, beyond live action. So, and I think as a young woman, a youngish older woman, 30 years old, I have some things I want to share, and people that I think can bring value to the questions that they are asking and to the challenges that they are facing. But that said, I think hopefully some men will find it interesting too.
Lila, you're amazing. I always learn a ton when I speak with you. Liveaction.org is the website. I'll say goodbye in just a second. You mentioned men. I want to mention that Father's Day is looming, and we are going to Germany. We're going to Catholic Bavaria, Regensburg, Munich, Dachau. We're going to go to Austria to see where Sound of Music was filmed. At Salzburg, our spiritual director is the amazing Father Willie Raymond, who's what's called the actor, the guy running the cause of canonization for Father Patrick Peyton, famous for his phrase, "The family that prays together stays together." It's happening next May. So May 17th to 25th, 2020. Here's how to sign up for the Father's Day special. It's $100 off per person. Easy to remember. patrickcoffin.media/pilgrimage. If you didn't have a pencil, patrickcoffin.media/pilgrimage. Liveaction.org. Check that out. Throw money. Hire Lila to speak. You'll learn a ton. There's just so many videos there. Lila, obviously proud of what you do and grateful that you're able to spend time with us on the Patrick Coffin Show. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Patrick.
All right, this is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?
Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. If you like what you see and hear and you want to see and hear more, consider joining Coffin Nation as a full member. Just click right here and find out more about what that means. Nipsey, my fedora. That's Coffin Nation, the world's largest online community of culture builders. Click right here. See you on the inside.